In the previous panel we touched upon the two options available to us when we come across mitzvot, either positive or negative, that are recorded a second, a third, or even a fourth time. One option is that the repetition comes to emphasize a particular mitzvah. In the case of the lo ta'aseh, an increase in the severity of punishment, and for the mitzvah ta'aseh, an increase in the reward. The other option is to interpret and apply. In other words, look for situations beyond the letter of the law to which the commandment can be applied. We noted that the preferred option is to interpret and apply. When this cannot be accomplished, then the repetition is explained in terms of the need for emphasis for that particular mitzvah. In the SICHAH, the Rebbe argues that the interpret and apply option is used by Rashi with respect to the command of lifnei iver lo titein michshol. But before doing so, Rashi himself adopts an interpret and apply position to the first commandment of Vayikra 19:14, that of lo tekalel cheresh. As noted in part 1, the prohibition against cursing a human being had been recorded earlier in Shmot 22:27, where one is prohibited from cursing lo tekalel, an Elohim, in this case a judge, and lo ta'or, with the shorish of aleph resh resh, to curse or verbally abuse. One may not curse a nasi, a leader of your people. While the object of the prohibition in Vayikra is the cheresh, whereas the object of the prohibition in Shmot is a nasi, nevertheless, we do have a repetition of the prohibition of lo tekalel. Clearly, if one is prohibited from cursing the leadership of a particular community group, then certainly one would be prohibited from cursing any other human being, including a cheresh. Hence the question, why the repetition? While it could be argued that the repetition comes to emphasize the severity of violating the lo tekalel, as noted, the preferred option is to interpret and apply, and this is the path that Rashi takes. In his commentary to the first of the two prohibitions of Vayikra 19:14, Rashi takes note of the repetition of the prohibition, arguing that the mitzvah lo ta'aseh of cursing applies to everybody, and as such, Rashi asks rhetorically, Im kain, lama ne'emar cheresh? Why has the prohibition been repeated? Rashi has the option of responding that the purpose of the repetition was for emphasis, laharbot belavim. This he rejects in favor of offering a reinterpretation to the lo yikalel cheresh. In this case, the cheresh is representative of one who is alive, and from which, in the words of Rashi, line 3, yatsa hamet, that the cheresh of this pasuk symbolizes a living human being, and therefore if one curses the dead, one is not in violation of Torah law because it does not meet the test that the object of the curse must be alive. Similarly, the Rebbe argues, we have a situation of repetitiveness with the second commandment of Vayikra 19:14, V'lifnei iver lo teitein michshol. Also recorded in the commandments following Matan Torah is the following: V'chi yiftach ish bor. A bor is defined as any opening in the ground, which in the opening stanza had been covered to the extent that it offered protection should someone or one's animals step there. If, however, for whatever the reason, one removes the protective covering, or alternatively, if one personally yichre bor, digs a large hole in the ground, and v'lo yichasenu, but does not provide protection from injury to others, v'nafal shama shor o chamor, and into that bor falls an animal, either an ox or a donkey, which in all probability was a common situation in the time of the Chumash, up until relatively recent times, that animals would frequently walk with their owners in the public thoroughfares. In today's day and age, it would be a situation of walking one's dog. In such a situation, even though, as Chazal note, the pit was dug in a public thoroughfare, Reshut HaRabim, Torah holds the creator of the bor responsible, and therefore Bal HaBor Yishalem must pay for the damage that incurred to the animal. This is a very early articulation of a bylaw that in all probability exists in every community throughout the world, worded to the effect that no person shall obstruct or cause or permit the obstruction of the lawful use of any common property with any object, fixture, or thing. Torah is case law, and hence the bar establishes a particular aspect of responsibility for damages that apply to the placement of any obstruction in a public thoroughfare that causes injury and damage. Nowadays, of course, these bylaws have been amplified, fine-tuned to cover almost any situation. Bylaws generally set out the responsibilities and rights of how the governing bodies are to react when one violates these bylaws. Having established the case law regarding the placement of an obstruction in the public domain, we then come across in SICHAH Vayikra a command that says that in front of a blind person one is prohibited from placing an obstruction that may cause injury or death. Surely one could argue that if one is prohibited from digging out a bore that might cause injury or death to an animal, then certainly one would be prohibited from the placement of a michshol in the path of an iver. In effect, Vayikra 19:14 is a repetition of a law that had been established in Shmot 21. As with the repetition of Lo Tekalel Cheresh, Rashi doesn't interpret and apply that the iver here is not one who is physically blind, and the michshol is not a physical obstruction similar to the bor. Rather, the iver is one who is summa badavar, blind or unaware of circumstance that may cause him or her financial loss, injury, or even death. And this becomes the basis for the reinterpretation that Rashi offers to this pasuk, namely, do not give advice that is inappropriate for that individual.